Hey, what's up, everybody? Dr. Ray, and today we are talking about ADDIE. And is ADDIE linear? Is it linear? Um, or is it iterative? Like what, I hear people say, I don't use the ADDIE model because it's a linear model. And I get confused by that comment for a number of different reasons. If you watch my other videos, you probably can understand why. But that's a very common comment that I see all the time. And that comment couldn't be further from the truth. The first problem, let's just talk about that comment and that'll kind of answer the question, is ADDIE linear? Is the ADDIE model linear? So the first problem with that comment is that ADDIE isn't a model. And I talked about this in other videos and just created a video about ADDIE not being a model. ADDIE is a framework to manage instructional design projects. There are many models out there that have been guided and developed because of ADDIE to develop instructional design projects, like the Dick and Carey model, Ross Keller Kemp model, Assure model, all kinds of tons of them. I like to say there are thousands of versions of ADDIE out there. So the first problem is calling ADDIE a model, and assuming it's a model. So ADDIE is not a model. ADDIE is a framework, and there's a bunch of different models that use it. So, okay, so you're using the ADDIE model. What does that mean? And I will kind of think in my head, are you using the model like originally created down at Florida State in the 70s? Because those people that created the first real ID process down there, ID framework, ADDIE, and it wasn't called ADDIE at the time, actually changed it again in the 70s. And then they changed it in the 80s. The original version of ADDIE that they created, which wasn't called ADDIE, but we'll just call it ADDIE for the sake of this video, was changed in the early 80s to not be linear. It was actually iterative in like 83, 84. That version was created by Florida and the Army and is still used by the Army today. I don't mean that exact version. I mean the initial draft from the 70s is what the Army's is based on today. But they have changed it many times to become the Army model that is currently used in the U.S. military. That is the latest version of the original ADDIE. So when someone says I'm using ADDIE, and I have to think like they're talking about the latest military version. And then when they say it's linear, I think to myself, dude, that was literally changed in the mid-80s. The 40 years ago. Well, 40 years ago. It was literally changed. So if you're saying ADDIE's linear, you're talking about a model from the 1970s. Why would you ever be using that when it's been changed like 400 times since then? That's like me saying, I don't use the Nintendos because the graphics are terrible and they don't even plug into TVs right. And the person's trying to use like the NES. And I'm like, dude, the NES wasn't made for current TV. It was made in the 80s. They used the Switch. Because when you say you're using the ADDIE model and it's linear, you're showing me an NES and trying to plug it into a regular TV. You're not using the Switch. So I get confused by the whole statement. So when someone says, is ADDIE linear? The answer is no, absolutely not. The actual current version of what we consider ADDIE is the U.S. Army model. So go look at that. And it has been iterative since the 80s. So no, it's not. Now, the other final piece of this is every model, no matter what it is, even if it's drawn in a nice circle, has linear components to it. Because there are certain things, and when I interviewed Dr. Branson about this, the founder of ADDIE, there are certain things that you just can't get around. Like, for example, you can't start developing an ID project before you have a problem, because you got to know what the problem is. You can't pick a technology before you have a problem. Like, there are certain things, before you know who the users are, you can't like start developing like a sketch of what it might look like. like a, paper prototype or whatever. Like, and I don't know who the users are yet. Like there's a lot of things that have to be linear that you cannot do because of time, because they're just like before. Like, for example, I can't start tying my shoe before my shoe's on my foot. Like, because then I'll try to put it on, it's already tied, it's too tight. So like there are many components in ID that regardless of the circle, nice circle drawing, and you tell me how iterative your process is, that are still linear. So that's the other piece of this. Just my thought of the day. I wanted to get it out there and tell people, talk to people about it, because it's a topic that interests me. So I'd love to talk about this and chat with people. So go ahead and please like comment on the video or whatever. But just so you know, that's kind of the history, where it comes from, and what I think of when people say, and just some things that in the field, we need to be careful how we talk to one another, because it does a disservice to the field in general and to ourselves when all of a sudden it's like written on a job description, understands the ADDIE model, and they don't really know what they're talking about, and you as a designer don't know what you're talking about to apply to that job and go there. And you all would just kind of like talk about this like just like generic thing that you're all making up. Like they have an idea what they think the ADDIE model is. You think in your head you have an idea what, and it's actually a framework. It's not a model. You don't know which version they mean, and it's like this whole confusing thing. So let's get our terminology straight and be able to talk to one another and create a good field. Later, everybody.